Welcome everyone. I am Sean Nardell. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Career Services in the Grad Center, which is a part of the Grad College. I am having let me just close some more things on my computer. Hang on, sorry. I am having computer issues today. They brought me back my laptop and it's not doing well. So I'm having some computer issues today, but I am very excited today and welcome to all of you for coming. I'm delighted that we have Dr. Mascha Gemein, who is here. She's an associate professor of practice in the Office of Instruction and Assessment, who's going to talk to us about writing diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. She has studied and taught at universities worldwide. She received her doctorate here in American Indian Studies here at the University of Arizona, where she conducted just some really interesting work, examining how different cultural paradigms are and can be communicated in environmental justice discourse. And she's published numerous papers in this field. At the Office of Instruction and Assessment, she consults with instructors on a one-on-one basis, doing things like classroom observations and focus groups. She also sometimes does faculty learning communities and a lot of work in professional development. One of the things she really focuses on is course redesign, syllabus writing, and using D2L and IT tools to enhance pedagogical strategies, grad student training, flipped learning, active and collaborative learning, and I think you're going to see a lot today. She is one of the people, if you're interested in talking about the certificate in college teaching program, she'd be an excellent person to talk about that, and I cannot more highly recommend that to all of you. She also teaches course in diversity, equity, and inclusion in college teaching. And with that, I am just delighted that Mascha was kind enough to come and talk to all of you about diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. So thank you everyone for coming today, and thank you, Mascha.
Oh, thank you for the lovely introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Think 1 hour and 15 minutes today until 1:45. So we'll hope to use the time wisely. My name is Mascha Gemein. Please call me Mascha. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And Sean has told you a little bit what I do as an educational developer. The only small update I have to give to this is we're no longer called the Office of Instruction and Assessment. There was a merger happening. We're much bigger now, and we're now called UCAT, University Center for Assessment just since this summer. So here's where we are. And what we want to do today is we'll try to answer those two questions. What do we know about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI statements? And how can we approach writing one, right? I chose this image of a yarn and threads and a needle because what people write and how they write is highly individualized and varied. You really have to stitch the story with whatever yarn you have. And we will talk about some strategies here. When it comes to DEI statements, there are no established practices or standards or standardizations. And so different places will approach it in very different ways. And what people say in their statements varies tremendously. The trajectory, the narrative, the structure might vary as well. So I know justifiably that feels discouraging, right? That feels intimidating. We'll give you some concrete strategies today. And I think I can speak to that topic because I am actively conducting some research on how hiring committees react to these statements. And so I think and hope that I have read the scholarship that's out there. And I'm also in an active exchange with other educational developers in the nation who, like me today, give workshops or webinars on writing these statements. And so we're sharing materials and strategies. But given that there is very little data available about DEI statements, and there is little training and standardization when it comes to the hiring committees, keep in mind, ultimately, what I tell you today partially is just my and my colleagues' interpretation and strategizing. And you may hear different things from different people, and there isn't necessarily a right or wrong. So I give that disclaimer up front. I invite you at any point of time to post questions in the chat, and Sean will keep an eye on it and let me know if questions are coming. And the slides are also will be available on the website. And Sean, should you have the PDF at hand, feel free to upload it to the chat as well, in case it's easier for someone here to follow along the slides independently rather than through my screen sharing here. So first and foremost, I'd like to honor the land and its people. We may be on Zoom, but we are all located somewhere, and where you are located in the chat and share that and share a land acknowledgement statement if you have one. What I would like to say about being here in Tucson, Arizona, is that Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes and additional tribes who are not federally recognized. Tucson is the home of the A'adam and the Yaqui. I also want to remind ourselves that the University of Arizona in its endowment has benefited from the sale of indigenous lands. And even when we think of online environment here in Zoom, there is a legacy of colonization embedded in the technologies and systems we rely on and for this session. And these technologies are not necessarily available to indigenous communities, communities of color, or poor communities, and yet they leave a significant carbon footprint that disproportionately affects these communities. So we need to understand our shared responsibility, and I'll consider our roles when it comes to colonization, to reconciliation, and also to allyship, right? And we can do this in many ways and contexts. And what we actually talk about today, these diversity statements, are one way for us to express and articulate our commitment and our practices. So let us start with the big picture. What do we even mean with diversity statement? It could be a separate document. It could be that you are asked in application information to talk about your commitment to equity and inclusion in your cover letter or in the teaching statement, or there may be an online form with some prompts there where you need to type in, or it could be the separate statement, right? So a DEI statement can come in various lengths and embedded in a variety of other types of documents. Today, what I will talk about most is a standalone document. And this is great to draft because if you have that and then you are asked to invest in something else, it's much easier to go from there. So we will aim for a standalone document here. A really wonderful resource just for the huge billion mile above the surface picture is AACNU, which stands for American Association, for Association of American Colleges and Universities. They have a website with their Making Excellence Inclusive campaign, and this has really impacted higher education. What I love is that they provide very clear definitions for terms, diversity, and they do a better job than my slide here, obviously. But diversity, very broadly spoken, as the individual and group differences, inclusion as the active, intentional, and ongoing engagement with diversity, and equity as the commitment to create opportunities and equal access to make change. And they talk about equity-mindedness, which is a term I love very much. Equity-mindedness as this awareness and the willingness to address equity issues. You will hear me often say diversity statement or DEI statement for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but you may encounter other abbreviation. You may encounter it as EDI, which is just a different sequence. You may see, even on this campus, you may see JEDI, which adds the J for justice to the mix. In some other places, you may see IDEA, which adds the A for accessibility. And there may be other abbreviations So these will change and continue to change and evolve. So as long as you're clear about the key terms you are using, you can talk about it as inclusive excellence or use any abbreviation that reflects your mindset and your practices. So what about DEI statements? Well, let's start at our university here at the UA. We have a hiring guide that is available online. You can find it. And when I looked, I a passage here that I copy and pasted on the slide. And it talks about what a hiring committee may ask an applicant to submit. And it will talk about the things we're very familiar with, a cover letter, a CV, research statement, maybe something about teaching, course syllabi, copies of articles you've published, letters of reference. All of these are very familiar. But then you have this third bullet point here. And that says a personal statement describing the experience in working with diverse students, diversifying a department, or demonstrating success in increasing a sense of academic inclusiveness. That's your diversity statement right there. And if you look further through the hiring guide, you also find a question catalog. And you find many questions pertaining the diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment that the university provides for hiring committees, questions they may ask you or that they may use in an adapted format. So that's very helpful. You may not be applying at this institution, but to see the types of questions that might be asked can be helpful. And if you're applying at a different institutions, make a search on their websites. Maybe they have a hiring guide too. Maybe it's available publicly, and you could see what they might ask you. Right? So this is a good idea. And how prevalent is this really? How likely will you be asked? Well, I'd like us to take a step back of about 15 to 20 years. A study had been done of the 2004-2005 cycle as to what application materials job applicants were asked to submit. And what they found is that while about 92% of search committee contacts said that teaching was important or very important to them, only 17% of job ads even asked for a teaching statement. So in 2004-2005, even a teaching statement is not common. So fast forward a good 13 years, there was another study done by the same researchers in fall 2018. And what they found here was that at this point, 50 to 80% of institutions asked for a teaching philosophy or a similar teaching statement. So now it was very common. And 33% of hiring chairs whom they interviewed also asked for a DEI statement, specifically in the tenure track area. And the smaller, more likely they were to ask for it. The latest study is the one I have displayed here on the slide. That's from 2021. And they looked at nearly 1,000 job postings and found out that about 19% required DEI statements as a separate document, which could mean that others may have asked to express the commitment in the cover letter or in the teaching statement. But 19% asked for a separate document. They also found that elite institutions were more likely, and that institutions in the West were more likely to ask for them. This could have two reasons. One, the influence of California, because in the University of California system, there is a blanket requirement for diversity statements. So anywhere you apply at a University of California school, you know you will be asked for a diversity statement. And so there's kind of a pioneer sense of what California is doing that influences other states. The other notion is there might be more democratic leaning states in the West who might be more likely then to be interested in DEI statements. And they also found that most often they will be asked for in the social sciences and a little less so in STEM fields and other fields. So what we understand now from these studies is that just like teaching statements were in their infancy 15 to 20 years ago, DEI statements are now in their infancy. We have little data about them yet, and they're going to transform with time and become standardized, and there will be more materials available. But things will be changing, and we don't have that standardization yet that we have when it comes to teaching statements. But we also can see from that example that the likelihood of being asked for a DEI statement is probably only going to rise, and that you should be expecting it if you're trying to go to California. So if something, it sparks discussion and debate. And the same happens to DEI statements. And it is valuable to be a little bit aware of the main arguments, because they may shift your approach to writing one. So the benefits of why diversity statements came into this mix of application materials in the first place was that many people do lots and lots of amazing work that goes invisible, that isn't easily displayed in other application materials. And this could be mentoring, tutoring, serving in trying to promote institutional change to advance inclusion and equity. Having done a lot of that commitment maybe outside of the university, but that informs your future work in institutions. And so especially scholars of color who do a lot of that invisible labor of mentoring and tutoring, being a role model and caring for students who see them as role models, this is a place where you can talk, where you can make your commitment and your practices visible. It also adds an additional narrative. So you can talk about things that the other application documents may not allow you to talk about. And it's most likely the one where you most genuinely can talk in your own voice and choose your narrative and how you express yourself. So you can show yourself from some facets that may not shine through the other application documents. Also, asking for a DEI statement is an expression of institutional commitment, right? And this is something that you may want to know. You want to go to an institution maybe that has an express commitment to equity and inclusion. But there are also fears and issues when it comes to DEI statements. One is that people tend to do a lot of self-disclosure of their social identities. And that, of course, stands in friction with the attempt of hiring committees to reduce bias in the process, right? And to not look at the social identities so much. Sharing and disclosing social identities bears the risk of backlash. What if you have people on the committee who have an issue with certain social identities, right? So there's some fear around what self-disclosure might do and what role it might play, what consequences it might have. The other is the same fear we've had with teaching statements, is that it might all be buzzwords, that it trivializes the issue, that people just say what others want to hear. So that concern is that do that. So how genuine and how evidence-based is what is written? The other fear is that it may undermine freedom of expression in both ways, and that it may become a political litmus test. You need to write certain things, make certain statements, share certain values, or it's going to be a problem. And so some people have likened diversity statements, if they are required, if they're mandatory, to faith statements, as religious institutions may ask, right? And this idea that you have to display a certain political attitude as well, and you're required to do so. I want to say the same people who criticize DEI statements in that way are not necessarily people who are against DEI statements, but they are against making them mandatory. They say if it's optional, that's great. You have something to say and to share, please do. But if you make it required, how do you protect the political issue, right? And so that's a valid argument. Now, the issues that were raised in the study that I have done with hiring committees, and we're still working on analyzing some data before we can fully share it, is that a lot of people on hiring committees says, well, the onus should rather be on the institutions than the candidate to express their commitment to equity and inclusion. And it is an interesting question to ask how much of that institutional commitment shines through in your job posts. And we will look at some and analyze that. Another fear, again, as I mentioned earlier, was the fear that self-disclosure could backlash and be negative, having negative consequences for the candidate, and worries around that. And the last part is that often when it comes to the job postings, the prompts may not be very good, resulting in not the type of statements that could be useful, or that they are simply badly written because there is not much support for, and it takes practice. So the big picture perspective is we need to be thoughtful of how we approach the diversity statements, but it is now a widely accepted practice. And we will see more studies that provide data so we can give more evidence-based advice and work on some standardizations. So for now, a lot of what we recommend when it comes to the DEI statements is based on the same recommendations of writing teaching statements. And you will note similarities as we go on. So I said the first part might be to analyze a job posting. That's the first thing you encounter. And what we may observe, there are questions such as, are diversity, equity, and inclusion mentioned? And if yes, where? Is it in the introductory paragraphs? Is it in boilerplate language? Is it in the preferred or minimum qualifications of the candidate? So where all does language arrive? And how specific is the text? Is it just from HR, an anti-discrimination clause that you have to include? Or do you see some intentionally crafted text, maybe from the department or the college, right? And what focus and whose focus and perspective are shared here? Another question to examine is also how does it relate to institutional demographics or a mission or a vision statement? And you may not see that alone in the job, that looking at the institutional web pages as well. But it's certainly interesting to ask, so what diversity are they thinking of in the first place? What are the big equity issues they're trying to address, right? And then the last from, as I said, if you know it's the University of California system, the job ad may not have that much content, but you know there's a lot on the websites of the different institutions. So what I'd like to suggest is that we take 5 minutes in a breakout room. I will share with you 2 links to 2 job postings, relatively random. Let me see if I can get that in the chat. And I invite you to browse these 2 job postings, skim them. You can't read them word for word. And with the questions in mind that you see on this slide, what language is in there? Where is it? Whose perspectives are shared? What may it draw my attention to? And then compare and contrast these. How would you interpret that? What do you learn about the institution and what the institution is preoccupied with? Does that sound all right? Yes, all right. Let's create some breakout rooms here.
Those questions that you just asked are on the slide, or?
The 2 links I've posted in the chat, and I can copy and paste the questions into the chat too, if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Will do, for sure. John, would you mind to create some breakout rooms while I'll post it in the chat, and then I'll let you know when we can open them. probably the 3 questions we can answer without any other contextual information. All right. Are we good to go?
We should be good to go.
All right, let's open the rooms. 5 minutes. Some rooms are still going strong. Okay, what are some takeaways? Would anyone like to share out? Feel free to use the chat or to speak up. And then
one of the takeaways was that for Syracuse especially, not much was mentioned at all. So we were wondering about the third question, that how are we even going to know about their equity and diversity issues without that? Then what do we address really while writing our own, right?
Yeah. Did Syracuse mention something that the other one did not? Even if it may have been boilerplate. Oh, there's a hand. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Griffin speaking. We saw in our group that the Syracuse posting did specifically mention fostering diversity, building an inclusive climate in research under responsibilities. So it differed from the first posting in that while we know in the California system a diversity statement is required, it wasn't highlighted at all in the posting. The posting was very research and publication focused, but this one is specifically including that desire to be part of the candidate responsibilities. But both also give us a background of what the university's populations are. And so in the first posting, if we scroll down, we did see all the way down that it talked about the population of students it served, campus information, which could very much aid you in crafting that diversity statement. And then possibly from here, I would go out to websites and start looking at the individual departments and seeing what they're focusing on.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you for sharing that. Did you take some other pointers from any of the job postings? You've been doing some good detective work here. Are there some other pointers you've
Riverside explicitly mentioned work. I can't remember exactly what they said, something about first generation college students or historically populations that historically haven't pursued higher education or been eligible for higher education. So it was kind of buried in there, but it might be something, if you specifically had that kind of experience, it'd be worth touching on in a statement, I think.
Yes, yes. That's one. Yeah. Any others? Mary?
Yeah, as somebody that's actively on the job market right now and trying to write all of these documents, I did really like that Riverside sort of provides some suggestions about like what counts in a statement, where they suggest, that there are numerous ways to contribute, research, teaching, supervision, mentoring, community engagement, service, and more. I appreciate that as somebody, trying to write one of these. And I think it kind of speaks to the question you brought up earlier, which is whether it ought to be the institution's sort of responsibility rather than the candidate's responsibility. Even though they're asking the candidate obviously to write the statement and to do that labor, they are at least meeting you part of the way by sort of saying, relieving some of that burden for the candidate that's thinking, oh gosh, maybe I've never served on like a D&I committee, or I don't have like formal sort of a line on the CV that can speak to this, but oh gosh, I did mentor that student, or I did, some other kind of service outside the university. I think that's really helpful that they give you some suggestions and parameters about what sort of counts.
Not everybody can have done a lot of things. And so to show what all different areas are there for future contributions can help for you to envision yourself in these different areas and figure out what might suit your personality and your work and what your assets, what you have to offer, right? Wonderful. Yeah. And even if you think of some of the boilerplate language that you see, there's often a non-discrimination statement. And then one of the two, I thought it was Syracuse, had a statement about veterans diversity, right? So that's another pointer of this is a specific demographic to pay attention to, that the university shows commitment, institutional commitment to. So have a little look of what language you find there, and it varies. And then you need to contextualize that information, because the job posting is just one little glimpse. So the next step is to study the institutional context of where this job posting comes from. And there's 6 good ways to see if you can find some information. And my point is not that this is a checklist and you need to do all of this for every single institution you're applying to. This is just a suggestion, like a menu of different ways to get some contextual information that could be helpful to interpret the job posting. So one type of contextual information that you may likely find is, again, a mission or a vision statement, and maybe a strategic plan. If you look at the strategic plan of the University of Arizona, you can see that inclusion and equity initiatives are much, right? So that can be a good pointer of how serious an institution is if you find it in their strategic plan. Another might be institutional demographics. Some institutions make it very easy to find information about the demographic of the students, the workforce, the faculty, and that gives you an idea about representation in the population of that institution. Some universities don't have that or make it mighty hard to find. And others to look for designation. We are an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution here. We are also an American Indian and Alaska Native Serving Institution. And we have some other designations, or sometimes it's more awards throughout time. The university received the Purple Heart designation because it's a veteran-friendly institution, right? We have a strong veteran population among our students. So looking for awards and designations of the institution also gives you a little bit of an idea and of some of their demographics. Another is to look for offices or centers. We have the diversity and inclusion unit. We have, or you may find a multicultural engagement and inclusion center, student centers or culture centers, even disability resources center, to kind of just look around where there is structural or service centers that, again, tell you something about institutional commitment, focus when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And if there is something like a diversity office, they may have a diversity officer in place, feel free to shoot them an email and saying, hey, I'm very interested in working at your institutions. I'm applying for a job in a department here. And I saw, something about your commitment on your website, so in your strategic plan, but I'm curious, can you tell me more about diversity initiatives you have on your campus, right? So show that you've done some homework, but take to ask for more information. It's totally okay to reach out. Then there might be diversity initiatives or programs or diversity data. Like here at the UA, we have the diversity.arizona.edu website, which gives you a wealth of information about what the university is doing. Sometimes you find it through inclusion and Title IX information. So that just look at their websites, use a few keywords, what comes up. And then the last part, which is always good to look at, especially when you're approaching an interview, a campus visit phase, is the news. And there's, of course, the internal institutional news. And then there is the city or regional news around it. You want to know what might have been some recent events and happenings, or if there's some controversies. The university got in the news because of something. So that's very helpful to look at too. And I know this feels intimidating. Again, my point is not that you need to do all these things all the time, but I hope that I may have given you an idea or two about how to find some contextualizing information that you may not have thought of yet. My question for you, just kind of to check in, what are some recent initiatives or developments here at the UA? If somebody would ask you, what's going on at your home institution? What is something you could mention? Go ahead, Griffin.
This is Griffin speaking. So here at the University of Arizona, for instance, we do have a diversity inclusion certificate that you can get through, it used to be through ODI. We also offer ableism 101 certificates through our Disability Cultural Center. We are one of only 13 universities in the country that have a Disability Cultural Center. In our writing department, we do outreach with our local high schools through a program called Wildcat Writers, which is specifically there to target. And of course, we're a Hispanic serving institution. And then the location of Tucson with respect to Indigenous cultures and communities is also one you can draw upon. So at our university, and I'm in the humanities, so I'm speaking to across the divide here, but in our area, it's highly focused on. And one of the questions I had to that was, when you're crafting these statements and you are applying for a posting where you know DEI is heavily influenced in that posting, or you know it's central to the position, for instance, in writing instruction, that's very common in our field, how do we differentiate our statements so that they're going to stand out when we know the candidate pool is going to have these experiences?
Well, the important part is that in your statement, you won't talk about what institutions do. You talk about what you do and how you can contribute. So if you've been involved in some efforts or are at least very familiar with efforts at your home institution, and you're ready to do that work at the destination institution, then talk about it. The point is that you show your expertise and your either past practice or your potential to jump right in and contribute in the future. And so when it comes to standing out, you're reflecting your individual mindset and practices. And you can tie that into the institutional context, but it's about what you've done and what you're going to do. And that's unique to you. And so that's the combination of sets that they're looking for.
And Mascha, there's some questions. I apologize, I haven't been quite keeping up on the chat. Charlotte asks, do you have a sense of how variable institutions are in their EDI goals? If it is very variable and each statement should be tailored to the institution, how much of our statement should be our personal views versus fitting ourselves into the institution? Mary says, I'm curious about these two. Marina, about some of the initiatives that are out there, talked about the U of A LGBTQ+ Association. And Maria noted that U of A is beginning to set up satellite campuses to serve Indigenous Arizona communities. Susanna noticed there's a new Latinx Faculty and Staff Association initiative. And yes, Maria, I also believe Indigenous students can now study here tuition free. Very exciting. Sarah asks, for me, diversity sounds still abstract and broad. Could you let us know some examples of activities that might be in the statement?
Okay, Yeah, so thank you for everyone who chimed in about what's happening here at the institutions. These are all fantastic examples, right? So be aware of your home institution. You may actually be asked in an interview. And so that's the kinds of things. If they feel you're not aware of what your home institution is doing, then how would you contribute to the institution you want to join? So as for how much we should tailor and how much of the statement, how much institutions vary with their equity and inclusion goals is tough to say. There is some overall goals around trying to decolonize and work against the racism that's ingrained in higher education across the board. Those issues are the same because we're all in the same system. But very often the specifics are localized. And that is what institutions should do. They should take a localized approach and see where are we, who's coming to us, whom are we serving, and how does our discourse need to look like. So that's why it's helpful to look at some of the local demographics or to look at a strategic plan. It will tell you a lot about their focus. We'll talk a little bit more about the structure of the statement in a moment. So I will just ask you to wait just for a second. We'll talk about this because the next part that we want to get to is, so what do we write? What do we write and how do we go about it? There are two studies that I have cited here that a good number of diversity statements. If you want to read them, I would suggest the one that I have printed in bold, the Sylvester and colleagues study from 2019. What I liked is that they outlined some of the major themes. And what we find there, and this speaks a little bit to the structure, is that these statements talk about how we understand DEI individually, what our understanding is, what our values are, what our personal experiences are, our practices, and then also what we future. And that part where we talk about how do we go from here, where do we go from here, that's heavily tailored to the institution you want to go to, right? And what they also say that let's not try to list things, list stuff we've done, list committees we've served on, list trainings we've taken, but to really think about the quality of our engagement and the influence it had on our actions or the influence our actions had on others. So really thinking about the quality, and this is also a statement. You don't just want to list 30 different things you do in your teaching. You want to give examples of how it really played out and to be reflected about it and to show the effect it may have had, right, on you and your students. But what they also find and confirm is what we've found in other ways, that there is simply no single way that applicants write these statements. So it's very much your own biography, your own situation, and how then you structure your narrative depends a little bit on that. And for biggest problems in writing these statements are those who have done a lot and there's no way to talk about it all, or people who have not been able to do a whole lot about it and who wonder, what am I going to write about, right? And so let's move on to some strategies of how to go about this. And I will also, let me make sure, I have included a few very nice online resources here. Not surprisingly, several of them are from the California system, but one also, I like it because it leads to so many other resources and links. You will have access to these slides, but I also posted the links directly in the chat if you feel like grabbing them right now. So how do I strategize with you about writing these things? I call it, coming back to our threading image, gathering your yarn. What can you write about? Just like with any polished scholarly statement, you don't write it and edit it and you're done. You some revisions. And so it helps to just collect your raw material and just to write down your experiences, your thoughts, your engagements, your commitments, your actions, and just write it all down. And the big components that you could think about is, first of all, the conceptualization, your knowledge, your values. What do you know about DEI? What's your understanding of the discourse, of the terminology, right? What's your experiences? And this is also an exercise to detect areas of ignorance. We don't know everything. We don't understand the full discourse. We may be quite knowledgeable about certain areas and not about others, right? I'm an international. Well, I'm very keenly aware of the issues internationals may be facing in these higher ed system. But I may not know a whole lot about other salient social identities that may play a role in somebody's experience, right? And it's okay. I don't need to fill all these gaps right in this moment that I'm applying for a job, but I need to be aware of what I know and what I don't know much about. That is helpful. And then to understand what are my core principles, what are my goals regarding equity and inclusion in my professional life. The next area is then, what do I do? What's my evidence? What do I practice, right? So how do I enact my principles and my values? What do I actually do? What evidence do I have for doing this well? Difference for somebody. How do I engage with diverse students, with diverse colleagues? And so this is about, just like your teaching statement, it's about concrete examples about your practice, and if you can, about the outcome of that practice. People want to know how it feels to be your student, your mentee, your colleague, your peer researcher, right? Whatever area you want to write about. So give us a little bit of an example of a story that allows us to envision. And so it's about what you do or what you have done, or if you haven't had much chance, what you will do as soon as you're given that chance to do it, right? To be very clear of what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, that's okay. Then project into the future. And the third part is what I may call growth and promise. How are you going to keep learning and maturing and informing yourself? How do you keep humble? And strategic plan about advancing equity and inclusion. What do you plan to do? And this is a mix of what you want to do just by your own motivation and background and interests. Your own background will tell you what you feel you can commit to the most and the best. And then also the institution you're applying to. And here's where the real tailoring comes in, right? When you talk about your knowledge, your values, you have that. You talk about your practice and your evidence, that's that. But when you think about the future, about what your contributions are going to be, that's where you tailor it to the destination institution. And that's why you need to know some contextual information with the job posting to do that well. And you could structure your statement in these three components if you wanted to, or you can mix it together because you organize your statement based on certain themes that you want to talk about, right? So this isn't necessarily the structure, but these are the three types of components that hiring committees are looking for. What understanding your knowledge beyond using buzzwords? Do you actually get it? Do you know what you're talking about? What have you done or are you doing? What's the effect of it, the impact, and what's your promise if you come to this institution? Okay. So does that somewhat answer the question of how much to tailor? I hope. Hope so. You all speak up if something doesn't make sense to you. So why do I stress so much that it's helpful to gather lots and lots of raw materials, to just stream of consciousness, write down all kinds of stuff, collect it somewhere in whatever format you want, is because you all have many experiences and you do a lot and you can't talk about everything. So we need to start figuring out how we then identify our story. And that's where you pick out which yarn you're going to use and how you're going to thread it and what stitching you're going to go for, right? So what in your raw materials are some things that fit together, that where you see a theme that's going through these. And I say this because if you try to think of the theme first, it's sometimes hard to find. But if you have a lot of raw material, suddenly a theme jumps at you and saying, oh, there's a logic in what I do that I wasn't even really aware of. And that might be your storyline, okay? So that may allow you to sketch out a cohesive narrative and then to think about the structure. How do you want to structure this? And again, just like your teaching statement, just like your research statement, just like your cover letter, this document is the teaser to you as the big feature film. It's just the teaser. It's what you tell people so they want to ask you more questions. They want to know more because you're interesting and you seem to have a lot of promise, right? So you have to pick and choose of what you're going to write about.
We've got a,
So,
oh, sorry.
oh,
We got a
go ahead
question
with questions.
I'm sorry, we got a question in the chat from Griffin. When you encounter a job post, it's clearly a boilerplate / institutional mandate, but
Mhm.
isn't highlighted by the department. Would it be a good strategy to situation your examples / statement in the work in the department is highlighting in the posting? So demonstrating DEI through research for the Riverside posting, for example?
Mhm. When you see something that seems more intentionally formulated, say by a department or college, take that seriously. HR language, so things that sound boilerplate, you know, they will be in there. It's important. It still gives you pointers, a little bit of pointers about the university. But whenever you see something that seems more specifically and intentionally formulated, you want to respond to that. You want to talk to that as much as you can. So yes, if, you know, when they have this one, I think it was under their responsibilities, job responsibilities, make sure to talk about that across all your documents, including the diversity statement. Your documents each other anyways, right? There should be some motives that pop up across all of them so that they are a cohesive whole. But yes, definitely speak to that. If you don't find much specific or intentional language, then look at the contextualizing information that you found and base it strongly on your experiences and your practice, what you bring with you, no matter where you go, right? So you may focus a little bit more on yourself. So let us have a look at some examples. I'm posting a link here in the chat. This is a link to a website. And if you scroll down a little bit on that website, you'll find a document with example segments from diversity statements. And what I'll ask you to do, and I will give you about 4 minutes in the same groups as before, is pick one randomly. I think there's 4 in there. Pick one of them and have a look at that together and discuss what makes the statement really good, what may be problematic about the statement. And then we'll come back. Does that sound okay? Is everyone finding the document on the website?
I think so. It's like a document that you can click on, right? It's kind of like.
Yeah, it looks like a little page with text on it. You click on it.
All right, yeah.
I hope you're finding that. And there should be, I think, 4 examples in there. So let's open the breakout rooms. 4 minutes is not a long time, so quickly decide which one you want to do. So based on the example you've looked at, what was something you thought was very well done and something that maybe was not so well done? Well, let's talk about what strategies the writers took about expressing their commitment and their practice. What types of narratives did you see here?
I just have a quick comment. The word diversity seems to be very deceptive to me. And from what I have seen, you know, I because I'm writing my research and teaching statement, I have included, you know, personal, you know, encounters in teaching, research, diversity all over the place without being aware of what I'm doing actually is, I would say, major contributions to diversity. But it's good to learn about, you know, the concept itself, diversity. But
Right,
what,
yeah,
what,
diversity. Go ahead,
what,
please.
what they are doing, you know, in those different, you know, specializations, they're basically trying to be engaging, trying to show how they are different from others, trying to contribute to diversity. I mean, to differences. I mean, how to be inclusive, and I would say not self-centered in a sense. That's it. Yeah.
Diversity is a phenomenon, right? So what
Yeah.
we actually do would be to try to contribute to inclusion and equity.
But the question which I asked, when someone asks you about diversity, it seems there is a problem, you know, that is all over the place. Oh, we have some problems with diversity, and that's why we ask people whom we are hiring to be aware of this kind of concept and all of its manifestations. So, yeah, I would say I am applying for a job maybe in Europe or in the Middle East, for instance. They might not ask me for something like that. Even some American universities wouldn't ask me for the diversity statement, although they
Right.
refer to it in somewhere. Oh, our university is, you know, observing those diversity stuff all over, and they don't ask you for something like that. So
Right, not everyone does. That's
yeah,
correct.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what we talked about earlier. It's an emerging that you may be asked to address it in either any of the application materials or a separate diversity statement. But it's definitely, the numbers are rising and it is becoming more likely to be asked. Yeah.
Susanna noted that the literature linguist offered a lot of background, but felt more of a list or bio.
Yep. Yeah, and you have your CV for listing out things, right? And you can refer to that. But write about is the quality of your engagement, right? What did you do? And you can see here that each of the samples, the narrative took a different approach. These are also not their complete statements, there are parts of those, but you have some possibility there to diversify how you're going about things. The important part, once you know what story you want to tell us, is to avoid some pitfalls as well. And since we have only a few minutes left, I'm going to move on to do that. We were a little slow anticipated, so we have slightly less time to discuss the samples. But here's to avoid something going bad. One aspect that is often criticized with diversity statements is they're too theoretical, too academic. But we talked about how you need to think about how you understand the discourse and the terminology, right? So that's why I say this is raw material. You need to be very clear of your own understandings, your knowledge, your gaps in knowledge, your potential blind spots. But your point then is not to give a lecture of what you know. That's part of the context you need to situate your story. So the focus of the statement still is what is within your reach to engage with, to change. What is it that you do? The next part is related to that. Some people are very vague. They say, well, given the recent events, it becomes very clear that we have much of a need for inclusion, right? Or to say, well, this or that population suffer more discrimination or has higher barriers to higher education than others. So general statements, big picture statements. That's great. And this is certainly part of what may motivate you. But anything in the statement should be about what you're doing specifically. So don't be too generalized. Focus on your own actions. The next one is, I am, fill in a marginalized identity approach. To say, like for me to say, I am a national student. And now what? Does that make me an expert on international students? Does that make me an expert on other aspects and populations who are not well served in higher education today? So just to say, here is my identity is not enough. It's about what do you do again, right? So to say that a certain, or to indicate that a certain identity may display a certain mindset or practice is not enough. You need to talk about that mindset and practice. Another is unnecessary self-disclosure. Early on, we talked how self-disclosure can be problematic. It could backfire. It could activate bias. Hiring committees often don't like a lot of self-disclosure because they are trying to fight and counter their own biases and know as little as possible. So this can be an issue, and it's difficult for everyone on both ends of the spectrum, the writer or applicant and the hiring committee. Another issue is the diary approach, and this is what one of you noted, to just list stuff, list your aha moments, list trainings you've taken, list committees you've been on. Now, this is all important for your raw materials, especially if you've had a few aha moments where you become acutely aware of discrimination of people. This is really important for your own motivation, but that's not what you will write about. You write about what you do because of your own motivation. Another is false equivalence. That would be for me to say, because I was an international student, I have a good understanding of how higher education feels for students of color. That's a false equivalency, right? That's not correct. So let's avoid that type of pitfall. Another is tokenism, and this is something you saw in one of the samples. They talked about a student I think they worked with, and then talked about how the students was successful. And that's great, but that's that student's merit, not yours, right? So mentored someone, focus on how you mentored them, what you did, and what difference that made for them, not taking their merit as your own. And the last one is the savior approach, is to be overly confident in your expertise and to say, well, I know how to solve these issues, so you'll just have to hire me. Or to start preaching, and this is something I see also in teaching statements a lot. Instructors should do X, Y, Z. No, don't tell all instructors what they should do. Tell us what you're doing and give us the scholarship for it, give us the evidence for it, tell us what you are doing. Don't preach to others. Focus this on your actions. And this was about what I hoped to share today. The last slide is simply just this overview. And this is so similar to a teaching statement, right? So you need to be clear that you have a framework in diversity, equity, and inclusion, what your principles and values are, concrete what you do, how you do it, what impact it has, to be reflective and growth-oriented, to be attuned with the institution you want to join. So do some tailoring there. And yes, well written and polished, just like any other of your application materials. So we are at the end and we are over time. I will officially end the webinar. But since it took a little longer than I thought to get through, I feel I cut you short. When you have my email on the title slide, feel free to reach out to me. And I'm also happy to hang on for a few minutes for those who can and would like to hang on and do a little bit more Q&A. But for everyone else, thank you so much for your time, for your attention today. It's so appreciated. And I hope this was helpful to you.
Thank you, Mascha. This is amazing information, and I love how you gave us great examples and such thought-provoking based questions. I think this is going to be really helpful for lots of folks. I am going to